There is a powder burn on the wrong sleeve of a man who had 9 weeks to live. The photograph is small, smaller than people expect when I tell them about it. A register plate, a little over 2 inches by 3, pasted into the booking ledger of the Laramie County Jail at Cheyenne, in the territory of Wyoming, in the first week of December, 1878. A scorch of black powder sits on his left cuff. 4 lines under his name, the same book sets him down as right-handed. Between those 2 facts, a man was hanged, and nobody in that courtroom asked the question I have spent 3 years failing to answer. The paper has gone the color of weak tea. There is a tide line of brown foxing along the right edge, where damp got into the binding sometime in the last 140 years, and the gum that held the print down has let go at one corner, so that the photograph lifts a little when you turn the page, the way a dry leaf lifts. A man sits in a plain wooden chair against a whitewashed wall. He is turned 3/4, the way prisoners were posed before anyone had agreed on how to pose them, before the front and profile pair we know now from 1,000 films. There is no measuring frame, no height scale chalked behind him, no little card of numbers held at his chest. Wyoming Territory was not measuring men yet. That came later, and from France. And it is one of the small surprises of this work that the thing we all picture when we say the words mugshot did not exist in this jail in this winter. This is just a man in a chair, photographed because the new marshal liked to have a likeness of the ones he was holding for the circuit court, and because a traveling photographer named by the studio mark Volmer had a wet plate outfit set up 2 doors down and would do the jail's work cheap. He is perhaps 30. The register gives no age, which is itself a tell, because it means nobody who booked him knew it, and he would not say. Dark hair, unwashed, pushed back off a high forehead. A week of beard, no more. The eyes do not meet the lens. Almost none of them do in these old plates, because the exposure ran long, and the sitter was told to fix on a spot on the wall and not move, and what you read as defiance or as fear is very often just a man trying to hold still for the count of 10, while a stranger uncaps a brass lens. His jaw is set. His hands rest one on each knee. The clothes are a working man's, a dark sack coat gone shiny at the cuffs, a collarless shirt buttoned to the throat, no tie, no vest that I can see. The register names him. I am going to tell you the name the book gives, which is Elias Crow. And then I am going to tell you that the family I eventually found, 3 of them, grandchildren of his sister, asked me to let the surname stand as the book has it, and not to chase the one they carry now. Names in this story are kept where the paper keeps them, and softened where a living family asked. The photograph, and where it sat for a century, are exactly as I described them. So Elias Crow he is, in the ledger, in the Cheyenne Daily Leader, and here. Now I want you to look at the left cuff. It is the kind of thing you would never notice on your own, and the kind of thing that, once it is pointed out, you cannot stop seeing. On the cuff of his left sleeve, just above where the wrist would be, there is a dark smudge. In the print, it reads as a shadow, a thumb-sized blur, a shade deeper than the worn black of the cloth around it. For a long time, I took it for damp, for another spot of the same foxing that eats the page edge. It is not. I have looked at this plate under a loupe and under a copy lamp, and I have had a man who restores wet plate negatives look at it too, and we agree on what it is. It is a powder burn. The scorch and stipple a black powder revolver leaves on cloth when it is fired close, the muzzle flash and the unburnt grains driving into the weave. A gun hand's mark. Fresh when this was taken. You can see, if you look, the faint speckle around the main smudge where the grains struck and held. A powder burn on the left cuff. And here is the second piece of paper, the one that turns a smudge into a question I have spent the better part of 3 years failing to answer. In the same jail ledger, 4 lines below the booking entry, in a different and neater hand, a clerk has noted the prisoner's particulars for the court. Most of it is the usual: height by guess, build, complexion, no scars given. And then, because the court would need him to sign things, a small, practical note. Writes a fair hand. Right-handed. The man in the chair signed his name with his right hand. The clerk watched him do it and wrote it down. A right-handed man with a fresh powder burn on his left sleeve. I am not a detective, and I will not pretend the smudge solves anything by itself. A man can fire a pistol with either hand. A man can hold a gun for someone else, can take a weapon away from someone, can be standing beside a shot that is not his. The cloth does not know whose finger pulled the trigger. It only records that a black powder charge went off within a foot or two of that left wrist. But the law that hanged Elias Crow 9 weeks after this photograph was made was very sure it knew. The whole case against him, when I finally pulled the docket and read it through, rested on the plain frontier certainty that a man with powder on his sleeve was a man who had fired a gun, and that the gun he had fired had killed a stage passenger on the Cheyenne road in the cold dark of late November. Nobody in that courtroom asked which hand. Nobody asked why the burn was on the wrong side for a man who, 4 lines down in his own jail book, is set down as right-handed. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Not that the frontier hanged the wrong man. I do not know that it did, and I will be honest with you all the way through this about what I know and what I am only guessing. The thing I keep coming back to is how little it took. How a smudge on a cuff, in a territory with no fingerprint men, no powder chemistry, no measuring frames, no science of any kind that we would recognize, could become the difference between a man walking out of that jail and a man dropping through a trap on a February morning. The whole apparatus of certainty in that courtroom was one dark thumbprint of scorched powder on a wool sleeve, and the cloth was on the wrong arm. I first saw this register, the actual bound book, in the back room of a county collection on the High Plains, 8 years ago now, when I had gone there for something else entirely, and the woman who kept the place laid it open on the table and said, "This is the one everybody wants to photograph and nobody reads." I read it. I have been reading it ever since. What I can tell you for certain, before we go any further, is small, but it is solid. There was a stage on the Cheyenne and Black Hills Road, the great rutted artery that ran north out of a railroad town toward the gold fields. And in the last week of November of '78, somewhere south of the Chugwater crossing, a man riding inside that coach was shot once and died of it before the coach reached the next station. That much is in the Daily Leader, which I have read on the microfilm, and which spelled the dead man's name 3 different ways across 4 issues, the way Frontier Papers did. There was an arrest. The man arrested was the man in this photograph. There was a trial at the spring term of the district court. There was a verdict, and there was a rope. All of that is paper, all of it survives, and none of it is in dispute. What is in dispute, what has never been settled, and what I am going to lay out for you across the rest of this hour, as honestly as I am able, is whether the man in the chair was the man who fired the shot. The court said yes, and the court had its smudge. But the smudge is on the left cuff, and the book says he wrote with his right. And somewhere between those two lines of the same ledger, there is a gap that nobody in 1878 thought worth stepping into. I have stepped into it. I want to take you through what is down there with me. The town first, because you cannot understand the hanging without understanding Cheyenne in that particular winter. What it was, what was moving through it, who held the law, and how lightly. Then the killing itself, what the road was like, and what a stage robbery on it meant and did not mean. Then the long, careful work of the censuses and the court files and the burial records, the three competing stories of who Elias Crow really was and what that powder burn really marks. And at the end, the likeliest truth I can offer, which is not a clean one, and the strange, small reason this one photograph of all the thousands the territory made and lost happened to survive at all. But it begins with the cuff. Hold it in your mind. A right-handed man, a fresh burn, the wrong sleeve. Everything else in this story is the territory's attempt to not notice that, and mine, 140 years too late, to notice nothing else. He sat very still for the camera. They all had to. 10 seconds, maybe 12, in the thin December light coming through the one-barred window, while the man named Vollmer counted under his breath, and the wet plate did its slow work in the dark of the lens. Long enough to hold a thought. I have wondered, the way you wonder about people you will never meet and cannot help, what the thought was. Whether he already knew how it would end. Whether he was looking at the spot on the whitewashed wall the photographer told him to look at, or through it, north, up the cold road toward the country he had come down out of, where whatever really happened on the night of the stage had happened, and where the other man, if there was another man, was riding free. Cheyenne in the winter of 1878 did not hold still for anyone. It was 9 years old, and it ran day and night. The Union Pacific had laid its track through in '67 and dropped a town on the bare plain almost overnight, the way the railroad dropped towns then, and Cheyenne had done what very few of those instant towns did, which was refuse to die when the rails moved on. By '78, it was the territorial capital, the supply mouth of the whole Black Hills gold country, and the shipping yard for a cattle trade that was about to make a short list of men very rich. Three things came together in that one cold town, and none of them were quiet. The railroad ran east and west through the middle of it. The gold road ran north out of it toward Deadwood, and the cattle came up from Texas to meet the cars. A man could stand on 16th Street in December and watch all three move at once. You have to feel the town to understand the trial. So let me try to put you on that street. Mud first. Frozen into ruts a wagon could break an axle in, then thawing at midday into something worse. Coal smoke low over the roofs. The depot at one end, with its telegraph clattering, the wires that tied this lost place to Omaha and Chicago and the world, so that a thing that happened here on Monday was in a Denver paper by Wednesday. Saloons more than the town had any honest use for, and gambling rooms behind them where faro was dealt. Not poker, faro was the frontier's game, the one the houses ran and the one men lost ranches at. Boarding houses full of teamsters and drifters waiting for the spring drives. And cutting through all of it, the great rutted track everyone called the Cheyenne and Black Hills Road, the stage line north, the thing that mattered most to this story. That road was the artery, and it bled regularly. After the hills opened to the gold rush in 75 and 76, the road between Cheyenne and Deadwood became the richest and most robbed stretch of stage line on the northern plains. Treasure coaches went up empty and came down heavy, gold dust and bullion from the diggings. And where gold rides, men with guns wait in the breaks and the creek crossings. The line ran a special coach, ironclad, that the papers called the treasure wagon, with armed messengers riding it, and even that was hit. The road agents of that road have their own small legends, names the daily leader printed and chased and sometimes hanged. So when a man was shot on the Cheyenne Road in the back end of November, in the cold, the town did not reach for mystery. It reached for the nearest explanation it already believed. Stage robbery, road agent, of course. That is the first thing the territory was sure of, and it is worth saying plainly that being sure was a habit there, almost a survival trait. Cheyenne had a vigilance committee in its early years that had hanged men off telegraph poles and corral gates with no court at all. And though by 78 there was a proper district court and a proper marshal, and the worst of the rope law was passed, the temper underneath had not changed much. People believed quickly and acted on what they believed. A jury in that town, in that decade, was not 12 strangers weighing doubt. It was 12 men who lived on a road that got robbed, who wanted it to stop, and who had in front of them a stranger with a burn on his sleeve. Let me tell you who held the law, because it matters how thin it was. The federal marshal for the territory and his deputies covered a district the size of several eastern states with a handful of men. The district court rode a circuit. The judge came through Cheyenne only for its terms, a few times a year, and the rest of the time, the docket simply waited. A man arrested in early December, like the man in the photograph, sat in the Laramie County Jail through the whole frozen heart of the winter, and was not tried until the court came back in the spring. That gap, that long, cold wait between the booking plate and the courtroom, is where most of this story actually lives, and the town went on around it without a thought, because to Cheyenne, the matter was already closed. They had their man. The road would be a little safer. The rest was procedure. The killing itself I have rebuilt as well as the paper allows, and I will tell you where the paper is firm and where it goes soft. A coach was running south, down toward Cheyenne, in the last week of November. Somewhere below the Chugwater crossing, in the early dark, there was a shot. One shot, the accounts agree on that. One shot, and not a volley. A passenger riding inside, a man the daily leader called variously Hollis and Hollister, and once simply the murdered drummer. A traveling salesman by trade, was struck and was dead before the coach made the next station. There was, the first account said, an attempt to stop the coach, a man or men in the road. There was confusion. There was a team that bolted. There was a driver who whipped them on through and did not stop to fight. By the time the coach reached light and help, the passenger was gone, and the road behind was empty. Now hold that picture. because almost every certainty the trial later rested on is softer than it sounds. One shot in the dark from a moving coach, a driver who, by his own testimony, kept his eyes on a bolting team and not on the road agents. Passengers who had thrown themselves to the floor. No one, when you read the inquest closely, actually saw the shooter's face, or his hands, or which way the gun was held. They heard a shot, and they had a dead man, and 3 days later, the marshal's deputies took up a drifter at a road ranch 20 miles north who had a revolver, a little money he could not account for, and a fresh, dark mark on his left sleeve. The town did the arithmetic it wanted to do. I said I would be honest about confidence, so here is my level on the killing. That a man died on that coach, that he died of one gunshot, that it happened below Chugwater in the last week of November of 78. Firm, 3 sources, no dispute. That it was a robbery at all, and not something else, a quarrel, a debt, a mistaken shot, a private murder dressed up after the fact as a road agent killing. That is softer than the town ever admitted, and I want you to keep it soft in your mind, because by the end, it will matter. Here is the part of the winter I think about most, and it is not in the legal record at all. It is in a single line of the jail register, and in a thing one of the sister's grandchildren told me across a kitchen table 140 years later. A woman came to the jail. Once. The register notes a visitor admitted to the prisoner Crow on a January date. No name given, just the word wife. She came in off that frozen street, through the same door the marshal used, and sat with him for the length of time the jailer allowed. I do not know what passed. The family memory, thin and worn, the way these things get worn, passing down a generation and then another, has it only that she came a long way, that she came once, and that she did not come to the hanging. Make of that what you will. I have made too much of it, and then made myself stop. Because that is the human size of this, under all the docket pages. Somewhere out on that plains, in the same week, the town was congratulating itself on a road made safer. A woman was deciding whether the man in that cell had done the thing they said he had done. She had the same 2 facts I have. A burn on the wrong sleeve. A man who, she would have known better than any clerk, was right-handed. She came once, and she did not come back. And a family has carried that single fact down through 5 generations without ever quite knowing how to read it. Did she stay away because she believed the town and could not forgive him? Or did she stay away because she did not believe the town and could not bear to watch them be wrong in front of her? The same silence fits both. It almost always does. That is the cruelty of these old stories. The surviving fact is usually the one that points equally in 2 directions, and the people who knew which way it pointed are all 100 years in the ground. The spring term came on. The judge rode in. The snow was going off the ruts, and the cattlemen were gathering for the drives, and the town turned, with the same quick certainty it did everything, from forgetting the prisoner all winter to wanting him tried and done before the busy season. The Daily Leader, which had run the killing hard in November and then let it drop, picked it up again in March with the bored confidence of a paper reporting a formality. The case, it wrote, presented no difficulty. The evidence was plain. And the evidence, when I finally laid the whole docket out on a long table and read every page of it in order, came down, just as the town had decided in December, to a dark thumb smudge of burnt powder on a dead man's left cuff, and to 12 men who had ridden that road and wanted it safe, and who never once, in the whole of the record, asked the question that the prisoner's own jail book had answered 4 lines under his name. Which hand? So I went to the docket itself, the real one, the bundle of court papers from the spring term. And I read it the slow way, page by page, the way you read when you have stopped looking for the story you expected and started looking for the thing that does not fit. And in the middle of it, in a deputy's account of the arrest at the road ranch north of town, I found the line that has kept me at this for 3 years. When they took him, the deputy wrote, the prisoner's right arm was bound up. Splintered, the word he uses, is set. The wrist set and wrapped. A recent break, a week old or 2 at the most, done by whoever did rough doctoring at that road ranch. The deputy mentions it the way you mention anything in passing, as a detail of the capture. The man could not lift his right arm to be ironed, and they cuffed him in front instead of behind. He thought nothing of it. Nobody thought anything of it. It sits there in the record, unremarked. A man with a freshly broken right wrist. Read that back against the jail clerk's note. Right's a fair hand. Right? He was a right-handed man. And in the last week of November, the week of the killing, his right wrist was broken and bound. He could not have written a fair hand with it then. He could not have gripped a revolver with it, could not have cocked it, could not have steadied it, could not have pulled the trigger with that hand at all. A right-handed man with a broken right hand. A powder burn on the left cuff. I sat in that reading room a long time when I found that, because suddenly the wrong sleeve is not a contradiction at all. It is exactly what you would expect. A man whose strong hand is broken, who fires a pistol for the first time in his life with his off hand, holds it badly, holds it too close, lets the muzzle ride near his own forward wrist, and the flash scorches his own cuff. The powder burn on the left sleeve is not evidence he did not do it. It might be evidence he did, awkwardly, with the only hand he had. Or it is evidence that someone else fired across him, near him, and the broken arm means he could not have been the shooter at all. The single fact, again, points both ways. But now at least the territory's easy certainty is gone. Now there is no version of this where you do not have to stop and think about which hand. And the court never stopped. And the court never thought. I want to slow down here and be very careful, because this is the heart of the whole thing. And it is where a person doing this work can fool himself worst. There are 3 stories that fit what survives. I am going to give you all 3 and tell you honestly how much weight each one carries. And I am not going to pretend the one I lean toward is proven, because it is not. The first story is the court's. He did it. He stopped the coach, or his partners did, and in the scuffle, he fired the shot that killed the passenger. And he fired it with his left hand because his right was broken, and the awkward offhand shot from too close scorched his own sleeve. And the burn, the town read as guilt, really was guilt. Just guilt of a clumsier and more desperate kind than anyone in the courtroom imagined. This story has the powder burn for it, and the unaccounted money for it, and a broken arm that, far from clearing him, explains the wrong sleeve. It is supported by the physical marks. It is the heaviest of the 3 on the simple weight of objects. I cannot rule it out, and I will not. The second story is that the burn is not his shot at all. Powder burns that close come from contact or near-contact range. A man does not usually scorch his own sleeve, firing a pistol out at arm's length at a coach. He scorches it when the muzzle is right against the cloth. There is a reading of the marks, and the man who restores plates for me leans this way, where the burn on that left cuff is the kind you get when a gun is fired against you or beside you, not by you, when you have thrown up a hand, when the shot is a struggle at arm's reach in the dark. In this story, the broken-handed drifter is near the killing, close enough to be marked by it, and is taken because he is near and strange and cannot account for himself. And the very mark that should have raised a question, a contact burn on a man who could not have fired, instead hanged him. This story has the close range of the burn for it and the broken arm for it. It has against it that it asks the marks to mean something the territory had no way to read, and I, 140 years on, can only argue. The third story is the one the family carries, and it is the softest in evidence and the heaviest in the heart, and I distrust it for exactly that reason. The grandchildren of his sister believe, on a tradition that has come down through women mostly, mother to daughter, that Elias Crow took the blame for someone. A brother, they think, or a man as good as a brother, a partner in whatever the two of them were really doing out on that road, which the family has always quietly believed was not robbery, but something closer to a debt collected badly. In this telling, the broken right hand is almost the whole point. He could not have fired the killing shot, and he knew it, and he let himself be hanged anyway, rather than give up the man who did. And the wife came once to the jail, not to forgive a guilty husband, and not to mourn an innocent one, but to beg an innocent one to speak, and he would not. And that is why she did not come back, and why the family has carried both grief and a kind of cold anger at him down 5 generations. I have no document for any of this. I have a kitchen table and 3 old people, and a story that, I admit, I want to be true. So I hold it at arm's length. But I will say this much for it. It is the only one of the 3 stories that explains the wife's single visit, and her absence from the rope as the same act, and the broken hand as central rather than incidental. The court's story needs the broken hand to be a coincidence that happens to help it. This one needs it to be the hinge of everything. I notice that, and I do not let myself trust that I notice it. While the court was deciding all this with none of it in front of them, 50 yards down the same street, the photographer was at his trade. And I think about his day too, because it is the reason any of this reaches us. His name on the studio mark is Volmer. The censuses give me a wet plate man of that name working Cheyenne in those years, born in the German states, the right age, and I am fairly but not entirely sure it is him. A wet plate photograph in 1878 was not a moment, it was a chemistry. He would have flowed the glass with collodion, syrupy and reeking of ether, sensitized it in a bath of silver nitrate in the dark, carried it still wet to the camera, made his 10-second exposure while the prisoner held the wall with his eyes, and run the plate back to the dark before the chemistry dried, because once it dried, it was dead. Every plate was a small race against evaporation. He did this for the jail for pennies, a likeness of a held man for the marshal's file. And he did it the same week he was doing wedding portraits and cabinet cards of cattlemen's wives. And to him, the man in the chair was Tuesday's work. He could not have known that of all the plates he flowed and fixed that winter, the weddings and the babies and the merchants. This one, a drifter, held for a stage killing, would be the one to come down to us whole. The wedding plates are gone. This one survives. I will come to why. He was, I should be plain, he was not yet convicted when Volmer photographed him. The plate is a December booking. The trial is the spring. So strictly the man in the chair is not an outlaw at all in that photograph. He is an accused man, presumed by the paper and the town to be guilty, and not yet told so by any court. We call it the outlaw's photograph now because of how it ended. But on the day the shutter opened, he was, in the eye of the only law that should have mattered, an innocent man with a broken arm and a smudge on his sleeve, holding still for a stranger's count of 10. The trial took, by the docket dates, parts of 3 days. The dead passenger's effects were shown. The unaccounted money was shown. A deputy testified to the arrest, and, I have checked this twice because I could not believe it the first time, did mention the broken arm in his testimony. It is right there, and not one person in that courtroom, not the defending counsel the court appointed, not the judge, not a juror, through any question we have record of, asked the obvious thing, asked how a man with a broken right hand had fired the shot, asked which hand, asked anything at all about it. The powder burn went to the jury as the proof of a gun hand, and the broken hand went past them like weather. They were out, the leader says, less than an hour. The road would be safer. That was the whole of it. I have stood at the grave. I want to tell you that part quietly, because it is the part that has no argument in it. It is north and east of where the town was then, in ground that was the county's burying place for the ones nobody paid to bury better. The stone, if you can call it that, is small, and the cutting is shallow, and the weather has been at it for a long time. It gives a name and it gives a year, and that is all. No dates of birth, because nobody knew them. No word of how he died. A man who was hanged on a winter morning got the same flat field and the same shallow letters as a man who died of the cough. And there is a mercy in that levelling, and there is also a kind of erasure in it. And I have never decided which I feel more, standing there. The family did not put the stone up. The county did, or someone did, long after. The grandchildren had never been until I took them, and the oldest of them put her hand flat on the cold top of it for a while and did not say anything. And then we drove back, and that is the closest any of us will ever come to him. So what happened, as nearly as I can give it to you? He was convicted at the spring term. The sentence was the one the territory used for murder, and it was carried out, by the records, on a morning in the early part of that year, in the yard, in the cold, before a small crowd, because hangings drew crowds even at their most routine. The wife did not come. The family is sure of that, and I believe them. Who took the body, the record does not say. It went into the county ground. The wife, I was never able to trace with any certainty after that winter. She appears in no census I could tie to him for sure, and a woman in that country who wanted to disappear into a new name and a new place could do it more easily than almost anyone. And I think she did. And I think she was right too. The man the family believes he died protecting, if that man existed, left no mark I could find at all, which is exactly what you would expect of a man who let another hang in his place. Absence is not evidence, but absence is what is there. Now, the strange small reason this one photograph survived, which I promised you, because it tells you something about how the past reaches us, which is to say, almost never on purpose and almost always by accident. The wet plates Volmer made are nearly all gone. Glass negatives were heavy and fragile and worth more, eventually, as glass than as pictures. There is a grim recurring fact in the history of early photography that whole archives of plates were sold off by the pound to be scraped clean and used as greenhouse glazing, and the sun came through the faces of the 19th century dead for a few summers, and then bleached them away entirely. The weddings, the babies, the cattlemen's wives, the ordinary plates a town generates and does not think to keep, went that way, or went into a fire, or went into a flood. And that is why the survival rate of these things is so low, and why the ones we have are so precious and so random. By every ordinary odds, the booking plate of a hanged drifter should have been among the first to go. Who keeps that? The marshal's office kept it, is the answer, but only because it was pasted into a bound book, and the book was a county record. And county records, unlike loose plates, sometimes get put on a shelf and forgotten rather than thrown out. The jail register went into a box when the old jail was replaced, and the box went into a basement, and the basement went into a building the county more or less stopped using, and the whole forgotten weight of it was handed eventually, water-stained and mouse-chewed, to the local collection, where a woman laid it open on a table for me and said, "Nobody reads it." The photograph survived not because anyone valued the man or the case or the face, but because it was glued to a page of bureaucracy. And bureaucracy, almost alone among human things, is sometimes too dull to destroy. He outlasted the wedding portraits of the people who were free that winter, because he was, in the end, a line item. There is a bitterness in that I have not got past, and I have stopped trying to. And so it comes back, the way these always come back for me, to the cuff. I have a good copy of the plate now, made carefully, and it sits on my desk more than it should. I look at the left sleeve and the dark thumbprint of old powder on it, and I think about how a whole life came down to that one mark, and how the mark says the opposite of what the men who hanged him were certain it said, and how it does not, even now, even with everything I have dug up, finally say which. The broken right hand tells me he probably could not have fired the way the court imagined. It does not tell me he did not fire some other way, with the wrong hand, against his own wrist, guilty and clumsy and doomed. The contact range of the burn tells me the gun was very close. It does not tell me whose finger was on it. The family's story tells me why a wife came once